All right, I just started the recording. I believe most people are here. Let me confirm. Nicholas, Raymond, Tom, Chad, Noah, Chris, Mark Henson, Ellen Spicer. We got the Kansas in the house. Bill Hughes, Mark, Keith, Kentucky, Margaret. Okay, looks like we've got most people here. Thank you all for coming for this to this sort of belated update on the roads and highways interface. Um, and thanks to Tom, we are recording this, and so I'll make this available after the meeting. I'll ask Laura to put it wherever it is she puts it, and send out the URL to everybody, so you can look at this later if you'd like. Confirming you guys see the roads and highways slide. I've got lots of monitors. Can you guys see the slide? We've got Tom. Yes. Okay.
Looks good.
Yes.
All right. Well, where are we again? It's been a while. So just to kind of give everybody a recap, we started discussing integrating Jackalope with roads and highways, specifically starting off anyway with getting site attributes, pulling site attributes from roads and highways into Jackalope, creating the link that links Jackalope and roads and highways, and creating synchronization logic that allows you to go in and actually press a button and synchronize attributes between roads and highways, as well as some other things like the ability to potentially automatically synchronize, do the synchronization, and a few things like that. And where we wanted to go is Nicholas kindly agreed to let us use his roads and highways instance as sort of a test bed, and so we were playing around in that. We were trying to create a proof of concept which would just iron out all the technical details, make sure there weren't any critical technical flaws, and there were. There was a pretty major technical flaw, which is that our version of Java that we use in Jackalope does not support the security ciphers that Roads and Highways uses in their ArcGIS web server, which basically stopped us in our tracks. We couldn't go any further until we made some adjustments. And we've made those adjustments. We now have, so basically kind of a capsule of what we did is we tried to upgrade Jackalope immediately to Java 8, and it just turned into this nightmare. It's something we have to do, but I was feeling the pressure of time, and we needed to get this done. And so what we did instead is something we've been talking about doing for a while, is separating out the Java web service, not Java, the Jackalope web services, JWS, if you're familiar with that. JWS is our endpoint for various REST web service calls. So basically you log in through Jackalope and you have the UI and the screens and the data and all the things that you do. There's actually another way you can log into the system that does not have an interface and allows you to do calls that, can get you some data, do things like submit monthly or whatever. That's also where this logic lives. I should have done a diagram, but basically there's the Jackalope database, and then there's the JWS, the Jackalope Web Services, and that web services component communicates with the Esri Web Services portal. So really, Jackalope isn't talking to Esri, JWS is, which is how it's been. But what we decided to do is we separated JWS. It is now its own web service with a different port number. And so Jackalope queries JWS, JWS queries roads and highways, and it all seems to work just fine. And so we got past that sort of critical flaw late last year. And then since then, we've just been trying to schedule this and have had some scheduling issues. So yes, we can now communicate with roads and highways. So yeah, we updated JWS. We created the site metadata linkages, and I'll go over what I mean by that here. We talked about that a little bit in our last demo, but it actually works now. And we just created a really simple sync with roads and highways button that will take a site, and based on the primary key that you define and based on what layer and what field you're looking for in roads and highways, we'll synchronize that site with roads and highways. And let me just go ahead and show you that. Okay. So the first thing we did is we went to site metadata. And site metadata, if you're not familiar with kind of advanced Jackalope, site metadata is where you define the fields that describe your sites. So when you go into the site list here and you look across the top here, you've got a whole bunch of fields. This is my test database, which I'm looking like it's Minnesota. My test database, which has a whole bunch of custom fields in it. If you actually drill into the site, you, unless your name is Christy, probably don't have a sequence number, continuous number, vehicle class number. All of these custom things are defined in site metadata. And it also defines things like, can the column be null? Can it be, or does it have to be unique? And other QC, like if it's a number, it has to be between these values, things like that. And all of these fields in the site table are actually also, these are described in the site metadata. And that's what we're looking at now. So this is what actually, I can't remember what I call it. Yeah, there we go. So let me go into this one. So basically I took my test database here, which like I said is, I think, Minnesota. And I just added a couple columns, a couple custom columns. One custom column defines the primary key. And so what I mean by that is, in your state, you have hopefully you have some identifier in Jackalope, just one of your normal, hopefully, like your if this were Minnesota, maybe it's the sequence number, maybe it's something else. One of these fields in here will allow you to link up with roads and highways and figure out what site you're looking for there. So in Nicholas's case in Utah, it's a traffic segment ID. And so in this test database here, I created a custom field called RDI-PK, which is the primary key. And what's going to happen is with this value here, Jackalope or JWS is going to query roads and highways and try to find this field, try to find this object out there. And with this object comes other stuff that we can use to query other layers. Specifically in the Utah situation, we use this information to get a geospatial coordinate. And then we use that coordinate to query any of the other layers. So basically, if you can imagine, here, I'll use my white paper here. Whoops. If you can imagine, this is a site point here where this site has a name, and we're going to use that name to plug into Esri, and we're going to get that coordinate, which isn't necessarily a lat long. It's some internal roads and highways coordinate. And then using that, we then have the ability to query other layers, like, there's a routes layer, and there's a county layer, and a functional class layer, other layers that have information that we might want to pull into Jackalope. And so establishing the primary key is the first thing. You need to figure out what information do I have in my site table that we can use to link to something in ESRI, in roads and highways. And like I said, for our testing today, it's going to be something that looks like this. It's I think, a route ID. Nicholas can correct me if I'm wrong, but somehow that this identifies a unique thingy that, let me get rid of that, hold on, that we can use to link up to roads and highways. So how you do the primary key is through here. So when you set up roads and highways, and I'll show you some mock-ups for doing that here in a second, but right now these are all internal parameters I set up in the internal settings. The base URL, which is the Roads and Highways map server, map service, that is the REST service that allows you to create roads and highways. And then also there's something that just says, oh, are we using roads and highways? And the answer here is that. So if that is set, if those things are set, you will get this box in your site metadata. And it allows you to specify where this column gets its information. Is this column owned by Jackalope, in which case you can just go in and start typing and do whatever you want to do? Or is it owned by Roads and Highways, in which case we're going to get this information from Roads and Highways? Or that's not exactly true. This information in the site field will be used in communication with Roads and Highways. So in this case, for our we're going to create a primary key. It can actually be a primary key or it can be a layer. And actually the primary key also uses a layer, but it's special. Once you're there and once you have these set up, and by the way, if you guys know your ArcGIS endpoints, and by the way, I was going to Google that earlier and I didn't, you could pretty much start playing this. We can set this up in your test environments and you guys can start playing and seeing what layers you have available and things like that. So with Nicholas, his primary key was in this particular layer here called traffic segments. And it was this particular field in the traffic segments. It's actually called route ID, but for some reason it's aliased as being called label. So this field will take, or this information will allow Jackalope to take this string that's in this field and get the appropriate coordinates in Roads and Highways. This is a lot of information pretty quickly. Are we doing okay? Glazed eyes? All right. I will take silence as not that you're all asleep, but rather that you are in complete understanding of what we're talking about. The other type of field is what we're really going to be playing with today, and it'll kind of show what I'm talking about. Is is a field that we're going to use in order to be populated from Roads and Highways. And so it's we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to go in here and I establish this fields as a Roads and Highways column source. And instead of being a primary key, which we've already established, this particular site metadata is going to be derived from an ArcGIS layer. This here are all the layers that Nicholas has available to him in the UDOT map server, the ESRI map server. And so technically we could get any information from here. Like I'm just going to pick county code. Wait, county code was already selected. I'm going to pick UDOT routes, okay? That's a layer in UDOT's Esri map server. And once you select that, this fields thing comes up. And these are all the fields in that layer. These are sorted by how they are created in ESRI, which actually, I had it alphabetized at first and it was really confusing because pretty much always the interesting fields are the last, either the last field or the last couple. So these are always pretty much the same with some exceptions. But so let's pretend that we want route description. This is going to bring back exactly the A15, isn't it, Nicholas? Well, we'll see. So once now we are describing what we're going to want to pull back from Roads and Highways. There's this post call function, which technically will allow you to do things like, strip out, or just take the first 4 characters, for example, of what's returned and use that for this field. Various things that allow you to manipulate the data from Roads and Highways. That's not been implemented yet. And then the default site action is what happens when a change is detected and we need to update the site record. Or are you just going to update the existing site record, or are you going to create a site split? So those are the values in site metadata. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So we're looking at u.routes, we're looking at route description, which I fear is going to give us exactly what our primary key is, but let's see. Then we're going to go back to this site that we were looking at, which has this string in it. This is our primary key, remember? And so it's going to go out to roads and highways, find this site, and then go to the layers, and the u.route layers and find the value for that site. So I'm going to press the sync from roads and highways button. Oh, no, it's not. So, and then this RDI test, I can't remember what it used to, I think it was blank before. Now it has this string in it. This came from roads and highways. So it says from the Utah-Arizona state line near blah, blah, blah. That's the value for the u.route description for this. There's a sub-route ID, you could look at that instead. We're going to update. Okay, and now let's go sync. Go back down. And here that changed from that description to this 0015, which is the sub-route ID. And so again, there's a huge amount of data here, and we could poke around and play, but that's the general idea. So basically the linkage has been set up through our site metadata columns here. And by pressing this button, we allow this field to be populated by whatever this site is. Okay. Is what I'm explaining so far cool? Are we all good so far? If you are interested in seeing this in your state and you know your endpoints, like Idaho, I was going to look up ITDSRI map server. I don't know if you've got a, maybe you do. Nope, you don't. We could go in, that's the normal stuff. We can go in your state if you know, I don't know, maybe yours isn't public or it's not Googleable. There it is. We could potentially go in and change that URL to whatever this is, and then you could query your own layers. Christy asks, does the sync only look at only active roads and highways records time breaks for an update? Maybe. Let's talk about that, Christy. Table that just for a second. I want to talk about the interface. I want to talk about my proposed interface for this, and I'll answer your question in there, I think. So if there are no questions about this, let me move on to where we go from here and answer Christy's question. Okay, where do we go from here? I'm actually going to just jump to this page here. So I took all the requirements that we've Margaret says our roads and highways isn't set up for external connection. Okay, cool. So I took all the requirements that we've been gathering over the last few calls and tried to come up with a somewhat sane design. I had really wanted this just to not be an extra interface. I wanted this to be kind of an addendum to the site interface somehow. But as we sort of drilled in and tried to figure out how this might look, I'm pretty sure that's just not going to work. I don't think we have enough flexibility in there. So my thought is we just need a brand new interface, something that looks like this. This is our suggestion. If it doesn't meet specs, obviously we need to change it. Or if you guys think of some better way to do this, that would be good. So let's talk about what we're looking at here. So over here, so this will be a brand new interface. You go into Jackalope, you probably go into the site thingy, site admin, and maybe it's under here or something. We could put the button anywhere you want, but this would be a completely separate interface. Up here in the upper right is the information on scanning the roads and highways interface. And here are the options, at least out of the box. You could do a full scan, and a full scan would basically take every site find its primary key, go query and figure out what the geospatial coordinate is for that site, bring all those back, and then go and query all of the site metadata fields that are layers, and query each of those with the 30,000 coordinates that you got back. It's possible this could happen quickly. I honestly have no idea. The synchronization that we have now is pretty quick, but it's super hard to extrapolate from 1 to 30,000. It may be that this takes 5 minutes, or it might be that it takes 5 hours. I doubt it'll take 5 hours, but I mean, there's a lot of variables. We just need to do it once and figure out how long it takes. There's efficiencies we can do to make it faster, doing things in batches and stuff like that. I hope this is a viable option. Well, it has to be a viable option because you have to do it once at the beginning. But I hope it's something that can be used regularly, but this is a complete question mark. These two, the date-based scans, are going to go through and they're going to query the appropriate layers that you have site metadata fields for. And ESRI has a nice little query mechanism that lets you pull back all changes as of a certain date. So this is much more efficient. So basically you're only pulling back those things that have changed, and then you go and you query all the sites that belong in those changed features. So if you have a county polygon, for example, that changed for some reason, it'll grab that county, it'll run a query to figure out which sites fit into that polygon, and it'll just change those sites. These I expect to be pretty darn quick, honestly. I mean, if you haven't waited a year to do it, but if you're doing this regularly, and we're going to talk about the auto sync stuff here in a second, but I expect this to be pretty quick. This, who knows? Christy's question was asking about, will it sync active versus whatever the opposite of active is, retired network. That's what this column is for. By default, it'll be current. So it'll use the current state of the network. And I've put a field here, a box here that doesn't line up to the thing anymore, but shows you how this is controlled. So basically this can either be current or it'll be a date. So this is a date dropdown, which defaults to now. This, I don't know if other people will want this. So this will be when we look at the options dialog in a second, you're going to see this is going to be something that's controlled. So either this could not be here at all, so people won't even see this, or it'll be a read-only action, like you go through and scan for differences as of a certain date, and then have this interface, but basically you can't do anything. You can just kind of view it. You can't go and update your existing Jackalope sites with the network as of a year ago. That would be the read-only option. There's an option for setting a role. That would be the only people that could do that. And then there's full access, which is just go crazy and put a date from last year and then resynchronize your Jackalope site table to what it was last year. Did that answer your question, Christy?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So you fill these out and you hit scan, and it'll hopefully, hopefully it won't take long, but it'll go and do what I just said. And there'll be some sort of description that explains what you're looking at here. So here we're showing records from the last scan, which happened here. So this will always show, like you could get out of this interface and then come back in. This will still be populated with the results of the last scan. This will still be stuff that you've got to operate on, basically, until you either get rid of them all through functions we'll talk about in a second, or you rescan and that basically resets it. All right, so I'm just going to talk about what's in the grid now. Like I said, the grid will come back with data after a scan, and it basically has the site. This is just your active road name, whatever that happens to be. It'll have a status, and status can be one of 5 things as I see it. A update can occur, which means that you've got a field in Jackalope, there's a field in roads and highways, and those 2 fields are different. So in this case, I just pretended we had a beginning mile point field in, that's our site metadata name. And in Jackalope, that field is 1.23. In roads and highways, it's 1.22. There's always, it seems like, 3 roads and highways fields. There's always when it was modified, who it was modified by, and then there's also a comment column, although in my experimenting with the UDOT, that this is always null. But maybe if in your state, or if, when UDOT goes live, that maybe changes will always have a comment. I don't actually know if that's true though. So that would be an updated status, would look like that. There's also a flag status. So in this case, we're getting the number of lanes from roads and highways, and number of lanes and a certain few number of site fields are kind of critical to with data. So if roads and highways goes out there, or excuse me, if a change occurs in roads and highways and that gets propagated to Jackalope, and that change requires some sort of operator intervention, like let's say you have data out there and you put the as of date before, and you don't want to change the number of lanes out from underneath that data, if that makes sense. So the operator would have to be told, hey, you've got data for this date. You're wanting to change the number of lanes at the site. You need to go purge the lane data, or some other action where you have to resolve this. This was the only example off the top of my head of a flagged situation that I could think of. But maybe other things, like if you change factor groups, you're in the middle of the year, someone goes through and changes all your factor groups as of the first of the year. You go change this to be the first of the year. You go click and it finds all those changes. Well, you've got data that's been adjusted, short-term count data that's been adjusted using that old factor group. The system needs to know how to resolve that. Should we ignore that? Should we go ahead and do the change and trust that you're going to run phase 3, or what's the deal? That's what flagged is. Ignored is something that you do. So when you first run this, you're not going to have any ignored rows. But if you say, I don't care that the beginning mile point changed, I don't want that propagated into the system, you would click that row or whatever rows that you wanted to ignore, and you'd hit ignore selected down here. And they would basically disappear from the list, unless you select to see ignored data like we have here. So it's kind of a housekeeping thing and a way for you to basically acknowledge a roads and highways change, and then just say you don't want it, and then have that out there. And so these ignored fields will stay out there forever unless you explicitly unignore it. So let's say this change right here, where you change the beginning mile point from this to that, for whatever reason, you don't want that, you can ignore it. The next time you do a scan all, it's going to remember that you ignored that. So it's not going to keep displaying this over and over again. So this is just a way to make sure that, there's certain things you don't want to deal with. You can ignore them and forget about them forever, essentially. And then there's these two last statuses, which are kind of the orphan statuses. Something exists in Jackalope that doesn't exist in roads and highways, and vice versa. And so, yeah, that's just what this looks like here. So how do you deal with this stuff? And that's what the checkboxes and these things are. And by the way, I don't have a snazzy little mock-up thing that gives me the filter boxes, but just like all of our grids, these will have the filter thingies down here. And so you can either filter by what you show here, or if you want to see all the beginning mile point changes, you could filter by beginning mile point and just say synchronize all, which will synchronize all the beginning mile points. And what that will do is it'll run the logic that we just saw being done in on the Jackalope side, where it's basically going to do that. Get the primary key, grab the point, get the layer information from the point, and update the site record based on whether you're going to do an update or you're going to do a site split. Oops. And that's what synchronize is. That's basically, here you're seeing what changed, and synchronize actually affects the change. It actually does, it actually moves all this information from here to here. So from the roads and highways column over to the Jackalope column. That's what synchronization does. Here's where the housekeeping ignore stuff. I don't want to see this anymore. And I'm realizing as I talk about this, we need an unignore selected too, because you do probably want the ability to, remember, maybe not. Maybe you don't need the ability to unignore. Maybe unignore is you just click it and synchronize it. I don't know. And then there's the auto sync stuff. Let's, oh, and by the way, yeah, hovering on a flagged row will give a description of why it was flagged. In this case, it would be you tried to change the number of lanes out from underneath a short-term count or a short-term count that was taken. And then the auto sync is the ability to do this automatically. So this is a completely manual process, everything I've described so far, but we did talk about making this automated. And let me actually go to the next page. I'm going to talk about the options, and the options talks about auto sync a little bit. So when you click the options button, you go to this, and this is where we're going to take the endpoint that's currently internal settings and put it there. This is that network as of behavior, which is whether or not this box shows up and how it works. All right, so then we have the auto sync rules. So auto sync basically allows you to take a subset or all of your columns that are layers in roads and highways and select some of them or all of them to automatically synchronize. So basically, they don't necessarily have to go through this process. So if there's a location description or something like that, and you're like, I don't care if that changes, whatever. I don't want to be bothered by it. You could select that and any others and let them auto sync. And that happens in the background. At this interval, it kind of depends, maybe hourly is a good interval. If depending on how quick it is, maybe you could even do like 5 minutes. I expect the date, and the auto sync, by the way, is always going to be date driven. So it's going to go from when the last time the auto sync ran was. So if it's hourly, it's always just going to query changes that happened in the last hour. And so these are, much quicker actions than doing a full scan. So I don't actually know if something like 5 minutes is doable. It probably is. That's my thought. But anyway, the point is this is the interval. If something goes wrong, like and I'm not talking about field issues, flagged issues. I'm talking about system errors where, oh no, we can't communicate with the roads and highway server, or oh no, the Jackalope web server went down, or something like that. We need to be able to notify the user that happened, and we need a way of doing that. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the alerts dialog, this thing here. This is part of just standard Jackalope. It's a role-based thing, and so based on a role, you get alerts. In this, I don't know, these are, I'm sure, user creation alerts. Yeah. So, and you could go through and resolve those alerts by double-clicking on them and doing something. So one of the options of getting feedback is through the alert mechanism that's built into Jackalope. For certain people, we can email. For people that we host, you could definitely email. For people that are hosted in your house, we've had trouble accessing email servers before, and most of our email stuff is turned off for you guys. But if we have the ability to send emails, we could also email someone if it errors, or both. And then role, this is actually should be plural, roles that get these alerts is shown here. So you can just create a new role called roads and highways and then assign users to that role. And each of those users would get emailed and they would see those alerts on the Jackalope screen. And so the auto sync now button basically performs that auto sync right now based on the options that we just talked about. And then the auto sync will have to be, it'll have to have a logging thing. It'll go through and it'll obviously timestamp and all the things, tell you how many rows got changed and pulled and what happened and all that. That will be available here. So that's our first thought for a interface for all of this. but I don't know if we missed anything glaring or if this is something usable by you guys or what. So I guess at this point, I'd like to open it up and first make sure this satisfies what you were expecting, you know, what your expectations are for the system. And if it doesn't, we need to figure out where that goes. Nicholas asks, would site groups or something similar be helpful in these interfaces to assign different roles to different sites? I'm not sure if that muddies things up or if it would help manage that information easier to apply similar rules to a large number of sites all at once and do the same with a different group. Yeah, I mean, that's actually probably a really good idea. Have some sort of filtering mechanism, which certainly should include site groups. And that's probably, are you thinking, well, probably here for sure in this dialog, but also maybe like for auto syncing. I don't know, would you have different auto sync rules for different groups? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Joe, I could think of some examples when it comes to like we have requests to report ADT on something that is like an exception to a rule when it comes to facility type and the mileage. So some of them we just hard code them and you wouldn't want them to update necessarily.
That totally makes sense. Okay, great idea, Nicholas. Thank you for the confirmation, Christy. I'm just going to, I'm going to send out this presentation. So let me just make a, so actually, maybe I was wrong. Maybe my first instinct was wrong. So does this need to be filtered by anything? This list of changes, or is it good just to bring back everything? Are we just talking about auto sync rules that should be assignable by site group?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, well, let's just
Maybe.
say for sure auto sync rules should be defined by, I mean, certainly system-wide rules, and then site group overrides. We don't need site-specific overrides probably, or do we? Do you want to just be able to say this one site, I just never want to see it again?
I think
The option.
that probably would happen. There could be something on our roads and highways side where we see it and say, yeah, we know it looks like this and it does this because it has to do something, but on this end for what we have, we need to have it show something else.
Cool. So maybe as a convenience function, we should have a button in that main interface that lets people to say, not only ignore, where were we? Not only ignore this one change, but maybe ignore site forever or something.
Yeah, or if it's in the if it's in the site table itself when you go into the site, if it's just a checkbox in there, I think that would suffice, because then you could probably not even have to have anything in the interface. The interface just looks for stuff that has that allows that validity check first.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So site UI change to allow for checkbox to disable roads and highways sync, basically. Yeah, scan actually, scan and sync both. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Then if you have that checkbox changed, it basically unlocks those fields that are being automated, and you are then responsible for making any of those manual changes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like it. We don't have to come up with the end all be all design this time. I want to make sure we're going in the right direction, because if you say, no, this is totally bogus, that's different than us tweaking, making small changes later. But any other thoughts on how this could work?
Joe, this is Christy. Would it be okay to ask something like earlier on that you were showing?
Sure.
So at Minnesota, we're not a registered event, but we do have a feature class that stores our segments and our count locations. You know, we still have the same task of needing to update all these attributes, but would there be a way for us to sort of use the location in our count location feature class to get the I think you had called it like getting the location, getting the geographical representation, and then somehow hitting the roads and highways information?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. I mean, you have some sort of information in your, I mean, this is your sites, right? So, you know, something in here potentially has.
It would be the sequence number would connect to a traffic count location feature class that you could get the location from to then hit the LRS.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not.
I could see that being really useful for people who don't necessarily want to be inside roads and highways or just aren't there yet, but manually updating those attributes is still a tedious task.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll play with it offline or something, but I'm pretty sure we can make that connection, and you would be able to suck it over once we figure out where your map is, your endpoint is.
Yeah, because a lot of that determines like how often you count it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants metrics on all those attributes, so great.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, that's exactly what we want it to do. So if our current design doesn't allow for that, then we need to fix it. You know, you would just set up the primary key, which would be sequence number for you guys. You know, you go, once you enter in your URL, I was hoping I could find it real quickly, but this would then populate with your layers. One of those layers has your sequence number in it. That would allow us to locate that sequence number geospatially and get coordinates back. And then the second step would be defining whatever fields, or if it's an existing field, changing this such that it's a road and highways from the layer, find the layer that has the location information that you wanted, find the fields within that later location, and then pressing the go button, you know. Right.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you could actually test that now on a one-on-one basis if we install this on JM and Comp Dev, and you figure out where the endpoint is for your arch.
Right. Yeah, and it might be trying to figure out is the Minnesota the access to those layers, are they set up correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. So yeah, if you get that information, I'll work with you to set up JM and Comp Dev, and we can just see if it works. And that
all right. It'll probably be a while. We're you know, super fun, busy time of year, right?
Yeah, I am aware. And that what I just said goes for everybody. If you want to see this on your test environment, just let me know. We will just need that, and it's possible through creative Googling we could just find it, but if not, you'll need to go to your GIS department and find that URL, the thing that looks kind of, you know, it looks like this. Well, I don't know where I am, but you know what I'm saying. The big old long HTTP URL. It looks like this.
Yeah, and just for me, I know that some of these layers weren't publicly available, and so I had to work with my GIS group to make them as a published service, and that they were available on our public REST API there.
Yep. And
That makes sense.
yeah, and so that's the test. Is you get that URL, you can actually go to it in a browser, and you get to something that looks like this. And this is ultimately the stuff that we will be able to hit. You know, some of them, you know, so these county code layer, municipalities layer, these are all layers that would show up in that list in Jackalope that you saw.
Yeah, and so like what we're hoping is that we're going to add much more onto that list of what we can hit.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, I hope this will be, I really like the way this is going, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. I mean, everybody seems to be adopting roads and highways, it seems like. Right now we have all kinds of different piecemeal ways of getting information from remote databases, and it's kind of a pain. Oh, Chad, once the sites are synchronized and tied to roads and highways, is that the same link that will then allow the HPMS statistics, etc., to be uploaded in roads and highways? That is a fabulous question, Chad. I don't know. So basically we took that off the table in the very first meeting. So site attribute is only what we're looking at right now. So there's two, to answer your question, we can update. We do, if we are given the permissions, we can update through that same portal ESRI attributes. So yes, I would expect that if we were given permission and we get the tokens and all this stuff, we would actually be able to push, you know, single unit averages onto your, you know, whatever has your HPMS statistics. That's one paradigm. The other paradigm that ESRI prefers is for us to basically expose a, what's the right word, Christy or Nicholas? It's some kind of extent thing where we essentially look like a roads and highways layer that can be incorporated. And so it depends on which, I think the first paradigm I talked about, where you actually want us to literally update roads and highways features. Yes, I think that this is exactly how we would do that. It would be something just like this, but for statistics. If it's the latter, if it's us creating external whatchamacoozits, I can't remember what they're called, that
Events.
Thank you, events. That's a different thing, and that's a knowledge deficit. We just don't know what that looks like. But that would be the next step. After we figure out the site exchange, that's where we're focusing next.
Yeah, Chad, I mean, on our end, you know, it made a lot more sense to just go one way, from the standpoint of not muddying it up to saying, okay, I'm going to edit something here, but then I'm going to have this also talk back to the server and edit that on that end, and creating all those different rules between it just seems to make it a lot more complicated. And so, you know, our thought is that if there's something that needs to be updated on roads and highways, is that we'll work with our GIS group to pull it from either a public database, or we'll create basically those event layers for them in a different way so that they can access that to automate it through some process.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. I mean, our road and highways group is going to eventually take over the entire HPMS submittal through roads and highways is the goal. So we'll need to be able to push the statistics up, or they'll have to be able to come get them themselves. So that's just where we're leaning towards right now. So
correct. So like all the ADTs and your KNDs, and we're basically looking at the same thing, but we just didn't think that it made sense that what we're talking about here really encompass that, because I think a lot of that work is on the roads and highways side more than it is on our side, and it just seemed like if it's just as simple as, you know, what our output is at the end of HPMS for those statistics, and that's what they're looking to have updated, then we can just still provide that data file, and then they can absorb it through like an FMA process or something else.
Okay, yeah, all that makes sense. It's all a learning process for all of us, I think. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we're all making it up as we go.
That is true. All right. So, certainly keep it in mind if there are things that there's certain things that I'm concerned about. Like I'm curious if the way we get your sites, Nicholas, in Utah is the same as Margaret's going to get her sites, or Christy. I would actually really like to do the testing that I'm talking about, where I asked you guys to find your endpoints, and we load the software. Because one concern I have is that the primary key paradigm that we're using in Utah is not the way everybody works. So if I want to find that out sooner rather than later, if we have to have a whole another different way of associating, you know, the primary key to other layers of information. That concerns me a little bit. And so basically at this point, other than that kind of data gathering, you know, we have this on our plate to do, and we'll actually be able to start testing. I would love to be able to hire another programmer. We are dramatically overtaxed right now, and I really want to get this and some other projects done quickly. You know, definitely by definitely this year, and my preference would be, you know, mid-year. We have a bunch of projects this year, and so anyway, just as an FYI with regards to timing, that's what we're looking at.
Hey, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you have. I've been kind of hearing that the debates, the temporal elements of roads and highways may not be what you think it is, and I don't know the truth to that. So I guess my question is, if this has already been covered, I can just get the information offline. But does it make sense that you're syncing the right dates to the right dates? Are these transactional dates you're getting for roads and highways, or are they effective dates like that?
I'm so sorry. I do not understand. It's super garbled. Can other people hear it? Is it on my end?
No, it sounds like he's in a car in a tunnel.
Yeah. Are you still there? Okay. Email me offline or whatever, or if, yeah. I couldn't actually hear your question. Sorry. Thanks, Tom. I couldn't even tell it was you, Tom. That's how bad it was. Okie dokes. Well, if no one has any other comments, I would like to actually schedule, just so that we keep on this, another call. Can maybe the next, probably today, we'll find a time, maybe in a month, to just kind of keep the ball rolling. Maybe it'll just be a quick update meeting. Maybe we'll have something to demo. That would be great. And hopefully by then, maybe some of you will have found your endpoints. And I might go and research that too. I might go pick everybody that joined this and try to find your services online. And maybe get more than just one test instance so that we can confirm some of these things are going to be generally usable. So let me, maybe in a month or so, I will, we'll have another meeting if that works for everybody. Other than that, we're perfectly on time. This is a rare event for us. Thank you all for joining. Email me with questions and comments. And otherwise, we'll talk next month. And thanks, Nicholas, for letting me abuse your data and all the information that you've given me with regards to connection and all that.
Certainly. Thank you, Jim.
All right, talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.